Hey folks! On July 7th, 2022, the speedrun moderators of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time made a massive change to the acceptance criteria of an individual run. Now, I'm an outsider to this community, so in order to learn more about this change, I spoke with Danny B. He is the administrator of the OoT Discord and the main communicator of this change.
Yeah, so we voted on whether or not it should be allowed to skip the introductory cutscene at the start of OoT speedruns. So in Ocarina of Time, anytime that you make a new file and you start a new adventure, a sequence of cutscenes happens where, Navi the fairy goes to meet the Decatry. Decatry informs her about Link's quest, and she goes to Link and wakes him up out of bed. There's Link's nightmare, and all told, it takes about 3 minutes before you ever gain control of Link himself and actually start playing. During those 3 minutes, though, there are a bunch of text boxes that you have to just, mash buttons through to advance the text. So it is possible to lose time during those 3 minutes if you are mashing the buttons slowly. Small amounts of time, but it's real. Like, time loss can definitely affect your run. Up until now, it has been mandatory to include that cutscene in your speedrun. So we would start the time of your speedrun right when you select the file from the file select screen. But now we are going to exclude that time from the speedrun. We're going to start time as soon as Link wakes up and you take control of him in his house, right near his bed. And you can still watch the cutscene if you want. If you're a purist and you think that that's valuable to you, you can still watch it. Time is still going to start when you gain control. But yeah, so our vote was whether or not to make this allowable, and it went through.
Now, all of this started because the Discord moderators started to see an uptick in people asking about whether or not the acceptance criteria should change, whether we should skip the intro cutscene. They were kind of annoyed having to sit through a 3-minute cutscene every time they started a run, so the mods decided to put it to a vote. But before that happened, there needed to be a discussion. A lot of that discussion revolved around convenience versus maintaining the purity of the game and the run.
It's come up quite a bit over the years. Like, it's that when you are creating a new speedrun, if a new game comes out, there's always the question of, where does the time start and stop, right? It's not clear cut. There's a lot of subjectivity there. Some games start from the moment you turn on your console, like before you even get into any menu, before you start playing the game. SM64 is a very popular one that does that. Some of the arguments in favor of it say things like, if you've done 15,000 runs over the course of your life, which is a mark that people realistically hit, then you've watched the intro 15,000 times, and that makes up a month of your life, right? You've watched the intro cutscene of Ocarina of Time for an entire month. And when you look at it from that perspective, it becomes like there's a wow factor to that. Like, oh, we can save significant time just by skipping this puny little 3-minute cutscene. So, but people have very strong opinions about, the game starts here and it ends here. Like, the beginning of the game, like the very first time that you are playing Ocarina of Time is a very strong case for it to be made, is when you open up a blank file, right? And that intro cutscene starts playing, and that's the beginning. Like, you start getting some cutscene, you start getting some story. It is subjective, but people have very strong feelings about what is the beginning of the game and what is the end of the game.
Another really, really interesting thing that Danny told me is that the definition of game purity has kind of evolved over time, right? In the era of Speed Demo's archive, doing any glitches at all was kind of considered to be impure, as it were. Even in Ocarina of Time itself, they made some sacrifices to purity, specifically for the sake of individual level speedruns. So before, in order to do individual level runs, you would have to play through a big part of the game to even start the run.
So what we did a couple of years ago was like, okay, no one's doing individual level runs because it's really annoying to do. The runs themselves are fun, but there's so much overhead involved. Let's just allow people to make a save state at the start of the dungeon on our practice ROM hack of the game that we use, and just reload the save state. You can use inventory editor to set up your file. Like, you can use cheats to set it up, so you basically construct the state that you would have if you were to play it normally. Like, you can't construct a fake state. It has to be in the actual state you would have had if you played the game, but you can use cheats to get there. And then we saw quite a lot more individual level runs happening because we sacrificed that purity in favor of fun.
Okay, now all of that being said, there was still a lot of pros and cons to consider when you're talking about skipping the opening cutscene. It's more than just convenience versus purity. Here's some of the other things that Danny mentioned to me.
The first one is that, it's just a huge time sink, and we can just give all of that time back to players over the course of a long grind. You'll be saving a lot of time. Of course, in saving that time, you get to do more attempts, like your real life time that you can devote to speedrunning, which is finite, will be more valuable by being able to do more attempts. You'll be able to reach your goals faster. You'll be able to improve more quickly. The skill ceiling of the whole game may get raised as a result of that. Those can all be construed as positive things. Some people will argue against that and say that if the skill ceiling gets raised, then there may be more incentive to reset your runs more often and earlier, right? Like right at the beginning of the run is where people are most likely to do harder strats than they would have done before, because there's no looming threat of that 3-minute cutscene in case you mess up. So that like people might reset counterintuitively even more often if there's no intro. People also, for those of us who want to watch the intro regardless, which some people still will, even if it's allowed to skip it, some people still will, they may feel pressured to skip it now in order to compete better with the people who are skipping it and getting more attempts. And so that may be unfair, right? That's not, even if you allow people to watch the intro, it becomes sort of just the meta to skip it at some point in the future when the runs all get better. Just making the game more accessible is a good argument in favor of skipping it, right? Like a lot of people will say that text mashing is a skill, and to some extent it is. Like there are people who are either more able-bodied or who have practiced mashing buttons in using certain techniques to go a lot faster, who will save time consistently in the intro cutscene over people who either may have a disability or who are just slower naturally at mashing. And some people may say that, if you can save that time, then maybe you deserve to save that time. Other people will say that mashing isn't enough of a skill to matter, especially because even for a healthy person, there may be health costs associated with mashing too hard or too often. One cool thing is that a lot of people have said that skipping the intro cutscene may bring them back to the game after a long hiatus because they quit because they hated it so much, or they're going to try it for the first time now because the intro cutscene was always something that was keeping them away. So it may open us up to new runners and a new influx of people who are joining the community. One interesting one that I didn't mention is that skipping the intro and watching the intro does not actually result in exactly the same game state when you start in Link's house, which was a very good, like completely objective argument against skipping the intro. There's no subjectivity there. Like when you start the game from the intro cutscene as normal, Link gets up out of bed and he walks forward a little bit toward the exit of his house and he stops there, and then you gain control. I guess I haven't mentioned how you would implement skipping the intro. You save the game in Link's house right after the intro cutscene. You take that save file and now you copy it to a separate file slot so that you can keep it around, and then anytime you want to start a run, you just use that file, right? So you jump up right into Link's house from the very early save. When you do that, Link doesn't do that little walking forward animation out of bed, and he starts a little bit further away from the door than you usually would. So skipping the intro actually puts you at a very small movement disadvantage right off the bat. It takes about 4 frames longer to exit Link's house, 0.2 seconds. It is what it is, but at least it's in favor of people who watched the intro, did the more pure thing, right?
Okay, so that was a lot of different considerations that needed to be made, but I will say from an outsider perspective, at least, and obviously this is just one man's opinion, but I think they made the right call here. I really value things like accessibility and approachability when it comes to speedrunning, and I think this is just a great solution for both of those problems. The other thing I want to say is I really commend the moderation team for how they approached this decision. They made it a democratic vote. It needed a 55% majority, right? So this wasn't going to change based on one vote being a swing. There was mandatory readings before you were even allowed to vote to make sure that everybody was informed about the pros and cons. But most importantly, the mod team has a massive, massive challenge ahead of them, which is retiming every PB on the leaderboard. Out of a total of 8,000 submitted runs to Ocarina of Time, they're going to be retiming about 3,000 of those, which is basically just omitting all of the obsolete runs. This is going to be a multi-month effort, and I do not envy them. But I do applaud them for allowing the community to make their preferred decision in spite of the heavy workload that it entails. The final question that I had for Danny is how he felt other communities should approach this question of cutscene skipping. Should OOT be a precedent or an example of other communities doing the same thing?
Yeah, there's definitely some measure of independence that every community has to have. Every game is so unique, and I just spewed over the course of the last half hour so much incredibly niche information to you about Ocarina of Time that most of the people watching would not have even fathomed that there was so much depth to this simple conversation. That, like, any other game, I don't know any of that about them, and only they do. But, Ocarina of Time in particular is very well suited to this sort of thing because we have such a very simple in-game solution to do it. Just you watch the intro cutscene once, and then you save the game, and then almost nothing of importance is different after that. Like, it's almost best case scenario. In other games that have done this in the past, Super Mario Sunshine is a notable one. They didn't really have very good in-game options to do that, and so they actually are playing on a community-made version of the game that skips the intro cutscene. I don't know the details, so if anyone who does know Super Mario Sunshine knows better and they're watching this and they're like, that guy's dumb, I'm sorry. But, they were seeing a huge drop-off in activity in their game because their intro cutscene is incredibly long. It is literally an auto-scroller. There's nothing you have to do during it. And so they made that call, fun and convenience over purity in this case, because the game was dying at a competitive level, and they did this, and now it's back, which is great. Good for them for making that call. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of considerations there. But I would hope to see more games go that route, because if you can get more people playing your game and get more people having fun with your game and get your community growing and thriving, then it's only positive things.
My friends, thank you very, very much for tuning in. If you like speedrunning videos, I encourage you to check back in with this channel later. I cover a broad range of games and topics in this space, and I pretty much always feature runner interviews. If you're interested in running Ocarina of Time itself, I encourage you to join the Discord server. They're super, super friendly, and they have tons of resources to get started. And otherwise, until next time, farewell.